What's good, fam? Welcome back to the zone. We are getting closer to the beginning of the NBA season, which means we are getting closer to the FBL season opener. I'm very excited because this has been a long time coming. For those of you that are new to the channel, this is something that I've been working on since April of this year. But the story goes beyond that. Obviously, it goes back to 2020. Based on the original 6 video that we had a few weeks ago, if not a month ago. But in any event, today we are going to focus on the LA Lakers, which is where the third brother and the oldest brother, Rafael, will be playing on. And so, as we did before in the previous vids, we're only going to focus on the players that have a 70 overall or above, and anything beyond that, we'll leave that for in the event that something special happens during the season and something I feel that should be highlighted if I didn't highlight them today. Now, with that being said, let's dive in. Now, first up, we have Dion King. And so as you can see, he is our point guard. He is the top overall player on our team. He's on the older side at the age of 34, but he's 6'2", 174 pounds. You'll see that he's a mid-range slasher with an overall of 81 and the total of 10 badges. And so with Dion, he is special in that he is modeled after Adrian Dantley. Now, the difference between the two is that Adrian Dantley is coming from the all-time Jazz. The build type is fairly the same, but from a height perspective, Dion is smaller. Weight, he's definitely lighter. From a badge perspective, Adrian had 28 badges versus Dion's 10. I just said it and I completely forgot. But yeah, or excuse me, not 28. Adrian had 14 and he was the age of 28 versus Dion, who's older with less badges. Now, from an attribute perspective, the attribute randomizer selected his offensive rebound, his defensive rebound, lateral quickness, speed, vertical, as well as the potential. So we have an offensive, even though it's flagged as an offensive attribute, I view it as a defensive attribute. So when we look at the offensive rebound and defensive rebound, both of them, well, actually one of them got augmented. The offensive rebound got bumped up from a 72 to a 99 versus the defensive rebound got downgraded from a 75 to a 70. Now, considering he's playing at the 1, he probably shouldn't be trying to get boards, but I do see that he's definitely more aggressive on getting rebounds compared to most of the players on the team, despite his small stature. From an athletic perspective, all of those attributes got downgraded. So Adrian's original lateral quickness was 80, Dion's is a 61. With the speed, it was 88. This has also been downgraded to a 61. But then the biggest downgrade that Dion actually faced was with his vert. It went down from a 90 to a 29. So I would have expected Dion to get more dunks. Let me just check the rating. So his driving dunk is 85, his standing dunk is a 65, and his driving layup is a 97. But being that his vert got dramatically downgraded to a 29, oftentimes you'll see Dion go for a quick lay, despite the fact that he can hammer it down on people if he wants to, usually if there's an open lane. But if there's somebody in the lane, or if there's somebody that's bigger than him or stronger than him, he won't go for any dunks. He'll typically just try to lay it up or do a floater. And now from a potential standpoint, Dion actually benefited from the randomizer in that originally Adrian Dantley's potential was 82, but Dion's got upgraded to a 94. So he's a little bit older. He has a potential to grow beyond Adrian Dantley's overall of 92. Will that actually happen? I don't know. And I think that's going to be tied to when his peak ends. So you'll see that he is 6 years pro, which means that he started in the league very late. But if you go up to the peak start and peak end, his peak already ended. So will he ever make it to that 94 potential? Highly unlikely. If anything, he'll probably start regressing within a year or two. I will say that Dion tends to be a ball hog. He constantly calls for ISOs and constantly calls for the shots. Now that may be tied to the coach settings in that he might be considered the primary ball handler or primary scorer, and so as a result, he doesn't pass the rock to anybody. Um, and so I'll take a look at that when the season starts, like during the premiere week, because I haven't played with any of these players at all. So you'll be experiencing the first time that I do. So I'll figure things out as the season goes along. Next up, we have Pablo Knox. So Pablo, as you can see, is a power forward, small forward, secondary, and he's one of the big men in the league at 7 feet or 7 foot tall with a weight of 257. He's also 34, like Dion, but he's considered a stretch four because he is able to shoot. I will say that. I'll give him credit where it's due. From a defensive standpoint, you can see that he is average at best when it comes to his perimeter defense, but on the interior, he's kind of weak, and it's definitely visible on the court if there's somebody that is a little bit faster or has a little bit better ball handle than expected at that position. He might be able to get by Pablo. But overall, I've been pleased with Pablo's play, and you'll see that he qualified for 28 badges and he's at 80 overall. And so what's unique about Pablo is that he is actually based off of a 2K base. The randomizer selected his hands. Now, unfortunately, he was one of the first, I want to say, 10 to 20 players that I created for this league when the player cards weren't as sophisticated as they are today. But like I said, his hands has an 82 attribute. His perimeter defense is, I don't want to say god awful, but it's 59. Now, granted, he may not need it at that position, but at the small forward position, he'll definitely need it. His steal is going to be a 95, which is helpful. He definitely rips the ball a lot. He's pretty fast for a big dude. Pause. With a 90 speed and a 92 speed with the ball. His acceleration could use some work. It's a 65. And his potential was actually downgraded to a 66, but as I mentioned in the previous vids, that 2K will overwrite whatever potential you place here based on the final calculation on the final average for the overall for the player. So in this case, the randomizer selected a 66 for the potential, but 2K overrode it and made it an 80. So with Pablo, his consistency is what annoys me the most, and 72 and a 74 from a consistency perspective isn't terrible, but it isn't that great, considering that we need that big body in the interior to take care of things on the defensive end. Now, him with Gilbert Hajiwara, the two together do make it more difficult for folks to get in on the interior, but if one of the two is out of the rotation at that point in time, the paint gets a little sweet in that regard. So despite his age being 34, I'm hoping that he'll be able to develop some of those skill sets over time. Worst case scenario, might need to trade him or find somebody better at that role. But from a scoring perspective, Pablo has been helpful, definitely at the 3-point line. He does brick it a lot if it's contested, but if it's wide open, he definitely helps out and gets some bucket to contribute to the overall success of the team. Now, next up, we have Gilbert Hajiwara, who is also a power forward on this team, and he has the same overall as Pablo, but there are some slight differences between the two. First and foremost, Gilbert is actually taller at 7'2", and he weighs 237, and he's a lot younger than Pablo. And so I call these two the Twin Towers because of their height and the fact that they're at the same position. Now, Gilbert qualified for 19 badges, and he is considered an interior finisher. And so unlike Pablo, Gilbert is actually based off of a player DNA. And so what makes him so good is that he is based off of the legendary Tim Duncan, who also was a power forward, and he also played at the 5 position. So Gilbert, his primary position is a power forward, but I'm going to consider playing him at the 5, and I'll tell you why shortly. But in any event, as you can see, Gilbert qualified for 19 badges, whereas Tim Duncan, his build is based off of the 97 to 98 Spurs, and that build Tim Duncan was 22. The height was 6'11", weight 248, and qualified for 25 badges. So, as you can see, from a height perspective, we now have a taller Tim Duncan, a bit lighter on the weight side, but from a badge perspective, almost the equivalent, probably different types of badges, but almost the same number of badges, with a deficit of 6 badges for Gilbert compared to Tim Duncan. Now, from an attribute perspective, unfortunately, each and every attribute that was selected was downgraded. So, for example, his post fade got downgraded from an 87 to a 26. Drive and dunk was downgraded from a 48 down to a 34. Strength was downgraded from a 87 down to a 35. That was his second to largest biggest drop compared to the post fade. And then his consistency dropped from a 90 to a 14 from an offensive consistent perspective. And pick and roll defense was dropped by 28 points, down from 78 to 50. Potential was downgraded as well, but you can see it got downgraded from a 98 to a 91, so that isn't too terrible. I will say that when I first created the team and started testing out how players play, I was a bit on the fence about Gilbert when it was on 1v1, mainly because his perimeter defense wasn't that great. So if you had another big that had better skills on the perimeter, let's say shooting or able to have better ball handle, he was lacking in that regard. But then once the team started to solidify around him, that's when he became more and more dominant, especially around the interior and getting those boards and a lot of putback lays. Can't say dunks. I don't recall him ever dunking, but he should be able to dunk. Yeah, at least from a standing perspective, he should be able to dunk it straight up. I don't see him driving and dunking it, but overall, I think Gilbert is probably going to be one of the more dominant players in the league as he develops, because considering he's only 21 and he has such a high overall, I would expect him to be able to get to the 90s by the time everything is said and done. But I've been pleased watching Gilbert play. Definitely in moments when you need some action in the paint, Gilbert definitely steps up and helps contribute to the team's success compared to most other players that I've seen thus far in the league. Next up, we have Raphael, who is the third and the oldest of the three brothers that I'll be playing with in this version of my league. You'll see he's 6'7". He plays the shooting guard, point guard position. That's what I played as in my career, so I kept that. Although 2K likes to place Raphael in a 3 position, and it kind of makes sense given his height. But you'll see that he's 23. His number of badges is 15, and he's considered a 3-point specialist. Although, I will say, watching the CPU play with Raphael, he doesn't make the shots as much as I would expect him to. And I don't want to say it's because of folks closing out, because even if he's wide open, he'll miss it. But I did notice that if it's a moving 3, he'll probably brick it. And so I'll keep that in mind as I'm playing with him. But once his feet are set and he takes the shot, he usually makes it. You'll see that the majority of his ability from a shooting perspective will come from the close range, and he could also shoot the midi. He's definitely consistent from a free throw perspective, but overall, majority of his benefits come on the defensive side. Now, each of these attributes aren't the greatest, because Raphael is literally the very first build that I created, and so I didn't know with the whole pie chart thing and the best mixture of how to create the best player, but I did want Raphael to be balanced. And so you'll see that for the most part, all of his attributes are in the 65 to 85 range, with a few of them being 99. On the defensive end, he's definitely consistent. I would hope so. Without me, from what I've seen the CPU do, he's been consistent, making sure that folks don't have an easy pass to the basket. He definitely contests shots where possible. He's a bit on the slower end when it comes to his lateral quickness, as well as his speed. It's only a 75, so he's not going to be as fast as most. But I will say, when he decides to turn things on, the CPU uses him, I don't want to say well, because I think he could do a lot more than what the CPU allows him to do. The CPU tends to rely heavily on Dion to get things done. But from a sim perspective, other teams have used Raphael and have selected him to be their lead player, and he's done well. And so with me, I know his shortcomings, and so I don't necessarily try to be super offensive with Raphael. I do want to help him develop some of his skill sets so he can be able to contribute more. But he's definitely going to be more of my defensive player to help get a lot of stops and contribute with getting dimes and getting boards and things like that. He can score, just not as much as the other players in the league, especially those with higher overalls and better ball handling skills. But this is my original player. For those of you that missed the original 6, he is the very first player that I created for 2K, and I have a soft spot for Raphael. Now, next up, we have Leo Yamasaki. And you'll see there is a big drop from the 80s to the 70s. There's a 9-point difference between Leo's overall and Raphael's overall. And so you'll see that Leo plays the 3 and the 2 as a secondary. He's 6'8", 198. He's a young boy, 82 or 22, age 22. And his badges, he didn't qualify for any badges, but he's considered a 3-point shot creator. Now, do note that Leo is part of the original draft class that I used in my previous My League session, so I did not assign any badges. I didn't create the attributes. The only thing I did for Leo was change his face because his original face looked a bit crazy. So from what I can tell about Leo, from what I've seen, he's definitely have a lot of potential, which is an 84 compared to his 71 overall today. And so for those of you that may have missed the other videos, an 84 in this world is not necessarily bad, just like a 75 in this world is not necessarily bad. There are some players that are 68s that are very impactful on offense compared to those that may be an 86 that aren't so much. So don't get too hung up on the overalls because that's tied to the fact that I reduced the intangibles down to 25, which you can see here. So that has an impact on how players overalls are reflected in 2K. But nonetheless, I will say that Leo can shoot, albeit a bit on the average side for the most part, from a free throw and 3-point perspective. But then from the median, the close shot, I've seen him miss a lot, but then I also don't see him take a lot of shots in that regard. And that might be tied to the tendencies. I'm on the fence as far as what I will do with Leo. Part of me has considered trading him for somebody better, but I will admit that it's a bit too early for me to make that snap judgment since I haven't actually played a game with these fellas on the court. I've only watched him play either via simulation or watched the CPU play with the teams as I was recording a lot of B-reel for some of our videos. But from a tendency perspective, you can see that it's a bit of a mixed bag where he will and will not take shots. And so when you couple this with his attributes, it will have a big factor on his success rate from a shooting perspective. But at the same time, Leo's a bit young, so he does have room to grow. You can see that he has at least the potential to go up 14, 13 points in an overall perspective, which means that he may excel rather quickly depending on his work ethic. So I'll give Leo a chance. You'll see from a grading perspective, his shooting is between a C- and a B+, which means that it could be hit or miss depending on the matchup. From a defensive perspective, don't expect much from him. Maybe on the perimeter, but not so much the interior, which he's lacking. And playmaking, he's so-so. Rebound, forget about it. That's not going to happen. But his potential is an A-. So we'll see how things go. He's definitely one of the better players on the team at 71, but considering that there's a big gap between the 80 and the 70s, I'm a bit concerned as far as how the team will play and how successful we'll be during the year. Next up, we have Xander Underwood, who's going to play at the 2 position and also fill in at the 1 position. So he, I believe, is filling in as a I don't want to say a bench warmer, but he'll replace either Rafael or Dion in the lineup when the first sub takes place. But you see that he's 23, he's 6'1", and he qualified for 30 badges and is considered a 3-level scorer. And you'll see that his interior, mid, and 3-pointer are at least the B level, B minus being the lowest rating that he has or grade for his shooting. Xander is actually based off of Stacey Augmon from the 99 to 2000 Trailblazers. The difference between the two is that Stacey's build was 31 years old at this point in time, 6'8", 205, and qualified for 7 badges. And that build also played at the 2 and the 3 position. So at least the primary position, they're both shooting guards, but the secondary position changed in that Xander is a point guard compared to Stacey. Now, from an attribute perspective, the randomizer wasn't friendly to Xander in that his close shot was downgraded from a 17 to a 51. His pass vision was downgraded from a 44 down to a 29. It was downgraded by 15 points. And then his shot contest was downgraded from a 81 down to a 46, which didn't really benefit Xander by any means necessary. Now, how big of a deal is that? I think on the defensive side, it'll have a huge impact, mainly because I think that's where this team is lacking. And so him not being able to, one, block or block well, he should be able to block, just not well, coupled with the shot contest, coupled with the fact that he does have a decent vert, but from a defensive standpoint, I don't expect much from Xander. From an offensive standpoint, I will say that he does take a lot of smart shots. And let me just see his shot IQ. 81. So what that reinforces what I saw. And when the team needs a bucket, he could be a go-to person. I just don't see him taking a lot of the shots that are needed when they're needed. But overall, my expectations for him are on the same level as Leo, and that's probably considering the fact that they're both the same overall. They definitely have room to grow, I believe. Xander's potential is, let's change that back. His potential is a 71, so he actually has room to grow by 1 attribute point, which doesn't bode well for him. And let me just see when his peak, start, and end is. 32. So he may stay at the 72 overall for quite a while. Hopefully over time might send him to some training camps to boost up his potential if we don't have any better other options. Can't speak English today. But I'm not gonna say Xander is terrible, because he's not. He's definitely helpful on the team. I think by placing him in the second lineup, he adds a little bit of depth to the team, although the team does need more depth to get things done if we're going to be in the playoff contention. But that is all I have for Xander. Now, after Xander, the next person we have is Sheldon Moss. You'll see that he's a 69. I'm not going to highlight Sheldon, nor Richard Green, nor Alonzo Evans, Sidney Frazier, even though Sidney's starting off as our 5 at an overall of 68. I'm not going to highlight him because from what I've seen, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Let me just give you my thoughts on Sidney real quick. But Sidney is actually, from the previous draft class that I had, he was undrafted compared to Leo, who was actually drafted as the 30th pick overall, so he was the last in the first round. Sidney was not drafted at all, so he was placed here by the randomizer, and so yeah, we're just dealing with Sidney. From a interior perspective, defensively, he's not that great. From a rebound perspective, he's not that great either. I've seen him get some blocks, but from an offensive perspective, he can score when he tries. But you see that his close shot is 87, his midi is a 70, and he can shoot the 3-pointer, but I definitely don't see him shoot the 3-pointer. Free throw, it's been shoddy at best. And so, yeah, he's just a big body that is here in our starting lineup. And that's mainly because I recently reset the rotations once the team became a full team with 15 people on the roster. And so that changed the dynamic. But originally what we had is we had Dion at the 1, Rafaela at the 2, Leo was actually a starter at the 3, and then Pablos was at the 4, because you see his primary is power forward, but his secondary is small forward. Now, considering that the next small forward is a 71, 2K decided to place Pablo at the 3 instead of the 4, and Gilbert actually played at the 5 before Sydney came into play when I reset the rotation. So I'm considering putting that rotation back in play. I know during the past segment where I talked about Leo, I didn't speak too highly of him, but I think from what I saw previously before the team was fully solidified, Leo was more impactful as a starter compared to Sydney being a starter. And so I would rather Sydney come off the bench. Gilbert is definitely dominant at the 4, but he was even more impactful at the 5, especially when you place him up against players like Brandon Moncrief or taller players like Zach Ellis from the Pelicans. There's a better matchup there at the 5. So I'm thinking about alternating Gilbert between those two positions and having Sydney come off the bench. Depending on how Gilbert's stamina is, we may change that to give Sydney more minutes, but I think right now we definitely have a lot of weakness at the 5 position that I think Gilbert would be better suited to filling. Same thing with Pablo at the 4 instead of having him come off at the 3, and then bumping up Leo so he's at the 3 and get his minutes there. But overall, this team is decent. Like I said, I have my concerns. We may not be a playoff contender. I'm hoping we will be. But it is going to take a lot of work on my part to get a better grasp on their capabilities as well as their weaknesses. I think compared to the other two brothers, Raphael will probably have the hardest time over the year, in that Chase, he definitely has a squad around him, even though there are a lot of overalls that are between 75 and a 68, some that may be questionable by most. They will be able to provide some type of accretive bonus to the team, whether it be on offense or defense. Same thing with the Pelicans, in that there are some shooters and there are some defenders there, whereas here it seems like the Lakers are going to be lacking on both sides of the spectrum, in that they don't necessarily have a lot of shooters, and of those that can shoot, it's going to be so-so, with Raphael as an example. But then from a defensive standpoint, I think these three right here, Raphael, Pablo, and Gilbert, will probably be the more impactful, although Sheldon and Richard Green can help out, but I just don't see them doing as much on the court. And that will do it. If you made it this far in the vid, please leave a like. Leave a comment below about what you think about the Lakers, and what are your concerns, if you think I'm out of pocket with my concerns. But as I mentioned before, we are getting closer to the season opener. I'm very excited about this because I have not played 2K in probably 5 months, and I'm eager to play. I wanted to experience this alongside of you as you watch this, so I haven't played, I haven't cheated, and get the inside scoop on these players. I have watched them play, but I haven't played it, so I'm looking forward to actually getting some game time in and hitting the sticks. So until next time, later.